Hey, hello everyone. Welcome back to another video. So what we'll be doing today is we'll be implementing a agentic loop. So what will this agentic loop do here? So the agentic loop will take the user message, pass it over to LLM. It will reason for it and plan for it. And then it will call a tool. So LLM will already know what are the list of tools available, and then, according to the questions that we ask, it will select the right tool and execute it. So, for today, what we will do is we will just implement a single, very simple list files tool. So, what it will do, it will take the path and it will list all the files as an output and then pass it over to LLM. Okay, so let's try to implement this list file functions with respect to the OpenAI LLMs. And as we go ahead in the video, we will try to explore more and more concepts. So let's start coding. Before we deep dive into the concepts of implementing tooling today in our chatbot, let's try to go through what we built in the last video. In our last video, we built a very basic chatbot that takes the user input using the scanner interface. We have an API key for OpenAI. We implemented OpenAI client using the API key. Then importantly, we built a agent structure. So agent structure just takes in two parameters, a OpenAI client and a get user message function, and it has a loop. So what does the loop do? It takes the user messages using the get user message function, stores it in the conversation history list in memory, and then passes it over to the chat completion API for of OpenAPI. And then whatever you get as a response from OpenAPI, we just print it out. One important thing to recall is this conversation history. So if you remember, when we tried to ask a question to OpenAI without using a history, OpenAI LLM did not remember what was our conversation context. So what we need to do is every time we send a new message, we have to send the entire history of messages that has gone between the user and the LLM. So in this case, what we do is every time we get a user message, we keep it as a user message. Every time we get a LLM response, we keep it as a LLM response, and we pass this conversation in the messages array to the chat completions API. Okay, so let's move on to the concepts for today. So before we jump into the functional coding, let's explore some parameters that chat completion accepts today. So as we are already passing the list of messages, the conversation history, as well as the model that we want to use, what we are particularly looking for is tools attribute. So the chat completion API accepts an array of tools where you can actually pass more than one tools that LLM can execute. So in this scenario, tools are just a way of LLM telling us that, hey, execute this for me and give me the output of that. Okay. So given that we already know that there is a tools param, let's try to have it. So let's see what is the data type of tool. Let's chat completion tool union para. So let's just implement it simply here. Okay, so as we just spoke, it is a list of tools that it is accepting, not a single tool. So let's try and implement the list tool functionality. Okay, so as we can see, what we need to pass is the chat completion tool union param, and OpenAI has already given a function for us where we just pass the attributes and it will convert it to the correct object for us. So yeah, it's called OpenAI chat completion function tool. And in this one, we have to pass a few parameters. The name of the function. Strict is when we really want to tell the tool to adhere to certain schema. We don't need it right now. So for now, we'll just erase it. Then description, like when and how to use the tool, and parameters. So parameters is very important. Here, what we are telling the LLM is, hey, whenever you want to call this particular function with this name, you are supposed to pass these arguments of these data type in this structure, or else I would not be able to call the function for you. Okay, so let's write our function name list files. For description, we can give a one-liner description. Okay. So the one-liner description can be tool used for listing files in the given directory path in the parameters. Use this tool when you want to list the files. Now let's see what parameters data type is. So parameter is a function parameter, which is just a map of string and any object. So for now, we will just use string of string to tell OpenAI that these are the attributes we need to pass. Okay, so now we have constructed the entire parameter object. Here what we are saying is, hey, you need to pass object where the property should be directory path, whose type should be string, and we add a one-liner description of what that string can be. And we say that whenever you call this function, this is the attribute that is always required. So we can always have attributes which are required and not required, but in this case we are accepting only one attribute which is always required. So let's try and integrate this tool with our OpenAI SDK. Okay, so now we can see we have initialized the object and then we are able to pass this into our tools list. Okay, let's try to run this. Let's ask what tools does this LLM have. So as you can see, OpenAI has the following tools: file management, list files and folders in a directory on your system, code related support. It can help with something, general knowledge. So as you can see, this is actually the tool that we have given. If we try to remove our tools, we should not see this again. Let's try. Okay, as you can see, it has a bunch of things: answering questions, writing, programming, help, math, support, etc., etc. But in general, it does not have the tool to access our file system. So yeah, so that means that when we are passing this tool, it is able to accept the tool and it knows that it has the access to this tool. Now, as you can see, we gave the definition, but we did not yet call the tool. So this is where our second important concept comes in, is where does the tool get executed? So let's move on to our presentation again. So what we need to understand is the tools are not running on LLM's environment. The tools are running where you are running the LLM or where you are trying to chat. So in our case, because we are running the chatbot on our local environment, the tool execution happens actually on the host machine. You need to understand this is a very critical concept. So if you actually see around, we have things called Claude bots, or I think they have renamed it to something like OpenClaw recently. What is happening there? You give your Claude code or OpenAI API keys, so and then you run it on your machine with a bunch of agents. Agents are essentially a way to interact with tools. This entire agentic loop is what makes agents. It is nothing fancy, it is nothing like miracle. It is just simple programming. We have a LLM, we have a bunch of tools. You run this entire agentic loop on your local, everything runs on your local, and it can access your entire system. That is how agents are able to do work like manage your calendar, book tickets for you, because they are actually accessing your systems. They are able to access your browser, they are able to access your files, credit cards, etc. So they are not really running on OpenAI or Anthropic servers. The tools are always running on your machine. This is the most important thing that we need to remember. And this is where we will try to now build the execution of the tools on our machine. Okay, so let's go back to our code. So in here, what we did was we just built OpenAI definition of the tool, but we did not yet build how the tool will be executed. So let's try and write the execution part of the code, and then we will understand where and how does the OpenAI API tell us that, hey, execute this tool. Because if you can see here, we are passing the tools, we are getting, and we are just printing it out. We are not taking any action. So let's first write what action we need to take with that tool, and then we will go in depth on how does OpenAI tell us that, hey, take this action, and our tool will be able to execute. So let's first write the execution. Okay, so now we have implemented the execute function for our tool. So let's go through and understand what does it do. So it just takes the argument call, it takes a bunch of arguments, which is map of string any. This is what the OpenAI will pass us. Now what we try to do, within this we see if the required attribute for this given tool, is it present or not. So the required attribute for us is directory path. If directory path is not passed to us by the LLM, we cannot execute this tool. So we return an error saying that directory path is required. If the directory path is correct and present, what we do is we try to read this directory. So we call os.read directory function, and then we try to find the entries or an error. If there is an error, that means maybe it's an invalid directory path or something else has been going wrong. Maybe you don't have the permission to list directories in that path. So it will return an error, fail to read this path with an error this. If everything is good, what we do is we just convert the file names in that directory into a list of strings with a new line as a delimiter. Okay, so now we have the execute function ready. Let's try to see and understand where does our agentic loop come into the play. So one of the most important things that we need to understand here is this agentic loop. Every time LLM calls, we execute this on our local and then we pass back the response. But how do we make sure and understand that LLM has asked us to execute a certain tool? So let's try and navigate that and implement that in our code. Okay, so if you try to recall our old code, what we used to do, we used to take the message from the CLI, we used to pass this message to our OpenAI SDK, and whatever response we got, we added to our conversation history and just print it out. Now, if you look at this part of the code closely, what does it say? It says that chat responses, we are taking first choice message and then we are trying to convert it into content. Okay. Now, but within the message itself, let's see what else is present. This is the response. So in here, content is the content of the message. But if you see, there is something else that is present, which is called tool calls. So earlier it was called function calls, which they have deprecated and now started calling it tool calls. Now in this tool calls, if you see what they pass us the ID. This is something that you can log it inside your database for some kind of a audit trail, but we will not try to use it for now. It is also largely to understand some kind of idempotency where we don't execute the same function ID again and again if there is some kind of idempotency requirement. Then the second one is the type. So whether it is a function or custom, we will just focus on function for now. So within the function itself, we have something called arguments. So arguments is just a string in the schema that we have asked the LLM to respond. So in our case, the schema that is expected is a JSON schema. And that JSON schema is something that we need to deserialize and understand and extract the attributes that we want for our function calling. It can be a bit overwhelming and confusing to understand things like this. So let's try and implement some. Okay, so what we will do is we will keep our conversation history as it is. We will discuss why we are doing this. But for now, let's try to see what type of message is the LLM passing us. Is it a function call / tool call, or is it just a normal content message? So what we need to do is we just need to check if chat responses price is 0 dot message dot tool calls dot length is it greater than 0. So this means that LLM is asking us to make a tool execution and not respond it back to the user itself. And then as we know, it can be a list of tool calls. It's not a single tool call. So we need to iterate over all the tool calls that the LLM wants us to execute. It can be that the LLM wants us to list directories for 3 different directory and has asked us to execute the tool calls to execute it thrice with 3 different directories. So in that case, we need to obey and execute the tool that many times. So it's a agentic loop. So this is where the agentic loop idea comes in. That is where we write the loop. So let's go. LLM is expecting us to execute. In this case, what we do is we just create an empty map and we unmarshal the arguments, which is already a string, into our args map. Then if there is an error, we pass the error back or else we execute our tool. Now we have to remember why did we actually keep all of this in the conversation history. So in the last video, how we discussed that LLM needs to understand and remember what conversation did we have so that LLM can respond accordingly. Now, in this case, when LLM has asked us to make a tool call, the next time we pass a tool response back, the LLM needs to know that it was LLM who asked us to execute a tool. That is why whatever, regardless of whether it is a content or a tool call, we just have to append it to a conversation history. So in this case, toParam will be a tool call. So if let's say in here LLM has asked us to make a tool call, it will just log that hey, there was a tool call expected by the LLM, and then we execute the tool calls. And as we go ahead, if you see, I have been appending everything to the history. So let's say if our unmarshalling fails, so we say that hey LLM, there has been an error in unmarshalling. So that is why we append the error with the tool call ID so that LLM can pin it back to which tool call has failed. If everything is good, then we call the tool response and append the response that we get by executing the tool along with the tool call ID so that LLM can understand that, hey, this is the tool response for the given tool ID. So this is important when LLM is asking us to execute multiple tools. We need to say that this is the response for this tool call ID. This is the response for the other tool call ID. And that is how exactly it will work. There is one more thing that we need to refactor in our current code. So if you see, there is a bug in the code where once you execute the code and we continue on the main loop, what ends up happening is it will start asking for the user message again and get stuck here. So until this point, what was happening is a user was sending a message to the LLM and the LLM was responding back. But in this case, what is happening when the LLM responds back, we don't still have to notify the user. We have to run the agentic loop by calling and executing all the tools and then immediately return it back to the LLM. We don't need user input in between. So let's try to fix that. So in order for to do that, we will just add another loop on top of this rather than using this as the only main loop. Let's do that. I think that's it. Let's try to run this. I list files in perfect. So it says here are the files in the directory this. And as you can see, these are the so many files that we have in my CLI chat. And yep, that's it. What we learned today is it's not very difficult to build a agentic tool. Like I think there is a lot of things going around how LLMs are getting arms and legs to do action. So in a nutshell, at the very fundamental level, this is what a agentic loop is. This is how a LLM is getting access to all of the tools like your browser access, your directories, your machine itself, and it is executing actions and taking actions on your behalf. So there is nothing to be overwhelmed about it. It is simple fundamental software engineering here. So thank you so much guys for tuning in to today's video. For the next video, we will try to integrate a lot more tools and make our chatbot do a lot more things. Thank you.